In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can record green screen footage with a handheld camera, edit it in Premiere Pro, key it out in After Effects, bring this keyed out footage into Blender, track it properly, color match, and do all the Blender work. It's a lot to cover. Let's get started. I have Premiere Pro open right now, and the first thing we need to do is make a new sequence. You can do either just drag and drop your actual clip in here, that should all match, or the right way would be go on File, New, Sequence, and then find the right resolution and frame rate. That one is very important, and I'm gonna emphasize it a couple of times today. So I shot this thing in 4K and 23.976 frames per second, so I'm gonna select that one. Don't forget to name your scene to make your life easier. Now I can drag and drop my clip in here, and as you can see, I recorded the clip basically when I actually want to start. Maybe I cut out a few frames in the beginning. So I'm gonna start here, watch through the footage. Okay, it looks all good, and I'm gonna cut away the moment. I can probably cut away later, earlier, but I'm just gonna cut away here. Just keep in mind, every frame you use in addition, like every single one of those frames, are gonna add into more complication. Like you have to track this particular frame, you have to render it out, and it can take minutes per frame to render something like that. So just keep that in mind to keep your keep your reels or keep your videos as short as possible, as long as necessary. Now that I have my scene here is basically done, all I'm gonna do is right click, replace with After Effects composition. Now After Effects opens up, and from there I can remove the green screen from my footage so I can render it out for Blender. Now I have my clip here. So the first thing I need to do is key out my footage. The way I usually do it, there's multiple ways, but the way I do it is the safest way. Just duplicate my layer with Control D or Command D on Mac. Now I'm gonna turn off the eye for my lower layer, and on my top layer, the idea is I'm just gonna make a black and white mask out of my footage. So the way I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna go right click, Effect, Keying, Keylight 1.2. Now I'm gonna select the green which I wish to remove, like this one. And from the get-go, it looks pretty decent. You can see I have some noise issues here, which are not gonna be a big problem thanks to my method. So what I'm gonna do here is, instead of using the final result, I'm gonna switch it to Screen Matte. Now that is gonna give me a black and white mask with obviously gray areas here. So my job now here is to replace or crunch the contrast rather of all the whites and all the blacks until everything what is white is completely white and everything what is black is completely black, just like that. Now I can turn on the lower layer again, and I'm gonna use the track matte tool. If you don't have it here, switch through the modes until you have it. Now I'm gonna use this pick whip from the bottom layer to the top layer. And now what it does when I turn on Luma Matte selected, it just actually uses the black and white mask to just cut it into black and white. So even if the green screen is not perfect, that solves lots of issues. Not all of the issues. You can see here the green is like reflecting a lot, so I'm gonna need to go closer here to fix that. So what I like to do is like increase the screen softness, so all the pixelated stuff is gonna be a little more soft. I'm gonna bring the blacks higher so I can get all those glitches out here. Now I'm also gonna bring the whites higher. The problem with that is you can't go too high because you're gonna lose lots of information, like especially in like hair and stuff like that. So you have to find a happy medium. Now once you're happy with the way it looks, one thing I like to do is already color correct it more or less according to my scene. So I'm gonna go into my bottom layer here, right click, Effect, Color Correction, and Lumetri Color. So since I shot this in S-Log3, I'm gonna put a LUT on it, S-Log3 LUT, so it basically makes my gray footage look normal. So you can see it in the interface, all the colors look normal now. Now, one more effect I need to do is using a spill suppressor, because you can see, especially in the hair here and some in the clothes too, that there's a lot of green spill from the green screen onto our subject. So there's an effect for that. Go under right click, effects, keying, and advanced spill suppressor. That already should remove all the green and basically move it into the opposite direction. You can use ultra or normal depending on what you want, but that works for me. Now I'm gonna need to draw a garbage map because obviously I don't want any of those surroundings to be in my shot. I only want her. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this pen tool, shortcut is G, and draw a mask somewhere around her. Make sure you're on the bottom layer, somewhere around her, so it's never gonna cut her out, but it also keeps all those tracking markers and all of that out of my shot, just like that. Now I highly recommend go through your footage to make sure you never cut anything out. Like here at the feet, it's getting close, so make sure you're not cutting anything out. Especially here, she's lifting her arm. It could happen that I accidentally cut her out, and that happens a lot, at least sometimes. So just make sure to scrub through your footage that doesn't happen to you. Otherwise, you see it in the final result, and then you have to export everything again, and you don't want to do that. And especially with a camera handheld movement, sometimes you even need to animate that mask, and which is quite possible here, especially with those green markers, but there's different ways to get rid of those. So here I definitely need to animate this mask because here I have some kind of foreground object, so I'm gonna hit M, go to a frame where it's okay, make a keyframe here by hitting on the stopwatch here, go to a frame where it's not good, like somewhere in the beginning it wasn't good. I just move this little point here, so now there's keyframe, so that part is animated. And again, I just look at all those spots, going through my footage, making sure she's never cut out. Great, now I need to fix those little dots here, and I'm gonna show you on one how you can do that. I'm not gonna show you the whole process how to do that on all of them because that would just take too long, but the easiest way is to just animate your garbage mat that those dots are always out of the shot. So I'm just gonna go through my footage frame by frame pretty much and animate my garbage mask that those dots are never inside my shot. But those markers are very important for the tracking process, which is going to be one of the next steps. So you definitely need to figure that part out, where to place your markers, preferably as far away from the subject as possible, but sometimes they're overlapping and then it gets complicated, like here. And then of course I have to make more markers because she's moving a lot, and right here they're like basically overlapping. So yeah, you just have to be very exact in those moments. But worst case scenario, you just leave them there and hope nobody's gonna see, which is also possible. But I recommend work as exact as possible, and keep in mind when you actually place markers, or like keyframes rather, so you don't make more than necessary. They're not flipping back and forth too much. So yeah, basically go through all your footage and do that. Okay, now once you're done, just hit F and feather the mask just a little bit. The closer you get to those markers, the less you want to feather it, but just a few percent, it never hurts in case you do get some sharp edges. Anyways, this part is pretty much done. Now we need to render this, so I can bring this into Blender with an alpha, which means with a transparent background. So I'm go on composition, pre-render. Under here I have a high quality with alpha preset. You should have that too. If you don't, I highly recommend go on your output module settings. Under format options, select Apple ProRes 4444 RGB and alpha. If you don't select that, if you only have RGB, you're gonna get a black background, and you don't want that. So I'm gonna name my file Allie key, that's what I'm gonna call it, and hit render. So the render process usually takes a few minutes, depending on your computer, can be faster or slower. So in that time you can already go and set up your Blender scene. But there's one more thing we need to do before we start in Blender. I already finished my 3D scene, you might just get started. But a few tips and tricks you want to do when you make scenes like that. For example, I would always recommend make your CG scene first, because then you know how you're gonna light your scene. Like for example, I have this very strong sunlight from the side, so I could also shoot my green screen character Allie also with the warm light from the side, so that matches. So you always want to keep those things in mind. Otherwise, you can get away with something, but you can't get away with everything. So I always recommend light your green screen characters according to your CG scenes. If you don't have any light setups or like lighting or any equipment, then it's probably easier just shoot your green screen the way you can, like with natural light, with windows or whatever you have, and then light your CG scenes according to that. So it's really up to your setup and to your means, what you have available to make this good. Now this is done and I'm starting off my Blender scene. Like I said, it's already pretty much done. I'm probably gonna fix a few things, but more or less the scene is done, and we can take a little look at it. So this is what my scene looks like, and as you can see, I have lots of cool models in here, and guess what? I didn't make any of those myself. The only thing I did make myself is the water ground here, but other than that, all those models are downloaded. And there's a lot of cool free packages out there, or just use Blender Kit if you want to create a scene without any modeling skills. Anyways, this here, where this guy is, this is where my green screen character is gonna be. I'm just gonna double check if he's properly integrated into the ground. He's a little too low, there you go. Now, I always keep a CG model of a person in my scenes, because then I know scale wise if everything is to scale. So when I bring my green screen character in here, I know if she's like the right size or not. Because my green screen character, you can see, I can see his height is 1.78 m. I know Allie is like 1.72 m, so I can make her a little shorter than him. Anyways, to bring my green screen character into Blender, in Blender 4.2 they updated it, so I just hit Shift A, go on Image and Mesh Plane. Now I can import my Allie key, what I just rendered, which is probably gonna somewhere in the background, but I want her to be here, so she's like selected right now. I'm gonna select him and I hit Control C, copy, and copy location. This is a plugin you can install. Now I can bring her into the right scale and position. So I'm just going to scale her up until she is more or less the right size. I'm going to bring her into the right position. I'm not worried about her rotation right now. So that's more or less the right height for her. Awesome. Now the tricky part is I need to bring my footage of her. Let me turn my compositor off. I need to bring my footage of her with the green screen and the markers inside of Blender so I can actually track it, because if I try to track this, there wouldn't be anything to track because we so hard worked on it to remove all that. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to save real quick. Now I'm going to go back to Premiere. I'm just going to redo or undo that, so I still have all of my markers here. So I need to export that, but I'm not going to export it as is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to color grade it. I'm just going to put my LUT on it. I'm going to increase the contrast by a lot. I'm going to make it a little brighter. So all those markers here are very well visible, like even the stuff on the ground, like anything what could be used as a tracking marker, I try to make it visible. So I'm just going to color grade it. It doesn't have to look pretty. It just has to be very clear what I can track from the background. Not her, I don't really care about her, just the background. Those markers are important, those dots up here can be important, the lights maybe. We're gonna see what we can actually track properly. So I'm just gonna color grade it the way that I think, okay, it looks okay, like contrast wise. And then I'm gonna go on export, find my folder, and I'm gonna call it Warzone footage high contrast, because again, I'm not going to use that for the actual scene, just for my tracking process. Many people here advise to render an image sequence. Me personally, I didn't really see a difference if you do it or not, so I'm just going to export it in 1080p, so my Blender is going to render a little faster. And yeah, let's export that, and then we're going to go to Blender to track this bad boy. All right, it is exported. Now we need to find our motion tracking tab. If you don't have it here, I have it like on default up here. If you don't have it, go on plus, VFX, and motion tracking, then you have it too. So now I'm gonna go motion tracking, and here I have to open my video. There it is, Warzone footage, high contrast. There it is. Now a few things I'm gonna do before I start tracking all that. I want to remove the camera I already have, which is this guy. I don't want this camera anymore. So I'm just gonna delete it, because we're gonna get a new camera out of this here. So a few things to keep in mind. Go onto your output settings, and the frame rate, have the same frame rate we're actually gonna use for your scene and your render and everything you recorded. Just like in After Effects and Premiere, it all has to be aligned, otherwise it's gonna be messed up. All right, let's start tracking this bad boy. When you open the motion tracking tab, the most important features are on your left here. Here you can track, here you can solve. On the top here you can see the camera view, which we don't have right now. We're not looking through a camera. And down here, it's also very important, we're gonna have all those tracking marker information down here once we start tracking. So what I usually do is I'm gonna go to the very first frame and hit set scene frames. What that does is it extends your timeline to however long your video footage is, which is 615 frames for my case. Now, prefetch, it loads the video into your RAM, so it loads a little faster. So now I can scrub through it a little faster. So again, go to frame 1, and now we need to track our footage. Now I could select my markers individually, which I can, like this, 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 and this. In case you wonder how I did that, I hold Control on my keyboard and hit the left mouse button, and then I can select markers myself. Now I'm gonna select them all, make them a little bigger, but that's not enough for me. I want more information. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go under location. Location is what I want to have selected. Keyframe is fine. I hit also normalize. Under tracking settings, I usually like to use either fast motion or blur footage. I'm going to use blurry footage. And now I'm going to detect features. Now I'm going to have way more features than before. Of course, I'm going to have some I don't want, like her. I don't want to track her at all. So I'm just going to delete those ones right away, because those are not going to work. Because she's definitely moving differently than the camera is moving. I'm also going to remove the ones behind her, because she's going to step into this. So I just want the tracking information from all the other ones. Now I'm going to select them all again, see how it looks fine. Now I'm just going to hit this little button, track markers, and it's going to track everything forward. For me, it's pretty fast. It's not always that fast, but now I can see a pretty good graph here, and I have a good idea how many markers actually worked and how many didn't. A good indicator for that is all those markers which like go out, like this one. I can actually see what this one does. You can see it's like jumping up and down. So I know this marker is trash. So I can just select it down here or in here, hit X and delete. And now there's another one doing something very similar. This one is down here, so it's being blocked. I can delete that one as well. And basically just blindly deleting all those tracking markers I see, they don't follow the norm. Once I'm satisfied with that, I can either solve it, or what I like to do is just go to the very last frame, 615, detect markers again, and track backwards. This process usually takes a little longer, and you can see a great example why you shouldn't be tracking your actual subject, because she's like moving a lot, and I don't want any of that movement. I only want to capture the movement of my camera. So those markers are definitely going to be bad. I'm going to delete them once this backward tracking is done. So now I showed you how to delete those markers individually. Just select them and hit X. But what you can also do is go and solve on cleanup, clean tracks again, and now I can have a projection error. It's something high, and that basically selects all the markers which have a projection reprojection error of higher than this number. I can select them and delete them, but that only works if I solve my camera motion before. So I personally recommend, before you do that, Just delete the ones where you know exactly those are not going to be good. So just delete them manually, because when you solve your camera, it always takes longer if you have lots of markers. So the ones you are pretty sure they're going to be bad, just delete them right away. Now when you think you're done, when you're ready to solve your camera, what I like to do is I hit keyframe, so I don't have to select keyframe A and B, select all of those and solve camera. Now that usually takes a few minutes, and the fewer markers you have, the faster it goes to solve your camera. So when possible, I always recommend just pick your markers yourself, because you need 8 good ones in the end. With a shot like this, it's a little more complex. So if you have like 20 good ones, that's better. But now that this is done, I can see my solve error is 2.79. You can see it right here. And this is not terrible. You can see on this blue graph here how steadily straight it is. And that's a good indicator, but it's still not perfect. And when I zoom in here, I can see why it's not perfect, because there's still a few markers like doing some funky business. And yes, I could delete them manually, but like I said before, you can also delete a bunch automatically. So again, I'm gonna go on clean tracks and go up with this value to, my solve error was 2.7, so anything under 2.7, like let's go, you don't want to delete too many, but let's go to like 2.5. Those are selected now. Now I can just hit X and delete them. You don't want to delete too many, because then you might not have enough and then you have to track again. But let's solve camera motion again and let's hope for better results. Great, now we have a solve error of 0.5, which is awesome. We aim for something less than 1 pixel, we have 0.5 pixels, and that is great. Now what we're gonna do is we have to set our orientation in the world. So what we need to do is we need to set our background and set up tracking scene. Now when I hover over this display, I already have a camera. Now I'm looking through my camera. Obviously it's looking into the wrong direction, but I can just select one of those markers here, like close to my subject, and set origin. So now this is my origin in my scene. Now I can select a few more to hit to select the ground, but I don't really have enough markers on the ground. Maybe it's gonna work with those 3. Let's try. Set floor, it didn't work. So yeah, I need like 3 good markers on the floor, which I don't have, but I can also do the same thing with the wall. So I'm gonna select 1 on the wall and select wall. When I go to my layout, I can see where my camera is. It's like somewhere here far in the background. When I turn on motion tracking, I can see my markers too. So now technically I can just grab this and bring this to where my scene actually is. So now my camera is actually here. I'm gonna rotate my camera into the right orientation, because again, if you have a perfect track of a scene, it's usually easier, but I'm just gonna do that manually. Bring it into the right position. Here I can look through my camera. I know my camera is too high right now. I was recording on like eye level, so the location should be like maybe 2 meters. But the meters don't really matter, because we're not on 0 right now, so somewhere where I believe that works. Yeah, when I look at the camera view, it actually works just fine, but I probably have to reposition it a little. I just know that this marker was definitely in the ground, so I'm going to make sure that this marker is also going to be in the ground, like this guy, which he almost is. So I'm going to move the camera a little lower. Perfect. Now I can rotate the camera a little into the right position where I actually wanted it to be, like let's say here. Great. Now this part is done. When I look through my scene, I can see her basically being in the ground right now, which I don't want, because she was like obviously moving, or rather the camera was moving. So the problem is the camera is pushing in, so she's getting smaller in the shot. So I can't really use that as is in the shot, because right now she's getting cut off by the camera. So what I'm gonna need to do is bring her in perfect alignment with the camera. The way I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna select her layer, go under constraints, track to, and under object I'm going to use the camera, hit positive Z, and now I try to align her the same way, or rather maybe align the camera, because I want her to stand there. So I'm going to bring the camera closer, so she's basically filling up the frame the way she was before. It's probably easier to see once she's like cut off. Like here she's cut off, so I'm gonna just go closer until she's gonna be cut off in both angles. Right now I still see the video background, which I don't really want or I need it anymore, so I'm just gonna go and under my camera settings and turn this off so I don't have my camera background anymore. Yeah, now I have a perfect camera match. She's like looking around in my scene, and then the camera is moving closer, just like this real camera was moving closer. Now she's like taking her selfie, but the problem is she's like basically double moving. She's like not perfectly in the footage. You can see on her feet, like when she's walking, she's basically swimming. She's like almost like moonwalking. And the reason for that is we need to track her also to the camera, because she's moving, the camera's moving, so we have to annul this double movement. So what we're gonna do is I select her, then shift, select the camera, and Control P, parenting. Now she's gonna be moving in real life, then she's gonna be moving like the real camera was moving.
One extra step is you need to scale your 2D plane according to the camera, so the 2D plane is actually staying where it is while the camera is pushing in. And Ian Hubert has a great tutorial on that. I'm gonna link it in the description because he explained it so well that I don't need to repeat that.
Now we need to work a little on her material, because she obviously doesn't look like she belongs in this scene. So what I'm gonna do is try to match the lighting and contrast and all the shadows to the same color. For that, it's very important that you go to the render engine you're actually gonna render in, and it's good to have an actual person in there so you see if they look the same. So I'm gonna align everything so it actually looks like the way I wanted it to be in the end, which is basically like that. I also need to turn on my clouds and my fog, so my computer's gonna get a little slower, but that's basically what I want. So now I can adjust my exposure to what I want. So now I have those two people right next to each other, so I can try to make her look like him, because this is like regular skin color, this is regular skin color, but it doesn't look the same. So now I'm gonna go to her materials and see what I can do. So this is my shader editor. You can open it up here, I always have it open. So now how could I make them look alike? So there's a few different things I can do. I definitely have to look at the shadows and the highlights. So the highlights are the skin. I already like that his shadow and her shadow pretty much have the same sharpness, so I did a pretty decent job lighting her. So there's different ways. You can do one thing that she actually receives light from the environment, but the other way is to have her not receive light from the environment, to make her actually completely emissive. For that we need two nodes, the transparent node and the emissive node. We mix them together with holding Control Shift, right click and drag from one to another, and the alpha of our video goes into the factor of our mix shader. Now when I increase her strength, I can basically make her look like him pretty easily. The problem is she's not going to receive any light, and she's also not going to throw any shadow, which is a shame. So that's usually my second go-to, but I just wanted to show you, and I'm going to leave this setup up here just in case I have to use it later after all. So I'm going to go back to the way I was doing it before. So this principal volume has lots of different materials. I can make it look metallic, so it's like reflective, but I don't want her to be reflective, so I'm going to keep this down, and the roughness can be up. But now how do I make her brighter? Very easy, just like in Photoshop or any other video editing or photo editing software. I'm going to make with Shift A new node, RGB curves, and I'm going to plug this before the base color, and now I can adjust her colors individually. So I can make her brighter. I see the reds are getting a little too bright, so I'm going to go to the red, go a little down with the reds, and maybe even I'm just going to go down with the red highlights. Back to curves, maybe I have to bring up the highlights. So I'm basically just playing around until those two people match. And don't try to do that just from looking at it just randomly. You want to have some kind of character next to your green screen character, so you can align those two people. So I'm also going to rotate his face into the same direction, and now I also see the shadow is a little harsher on him than on her, so I can also adjust that. But also I need to bring up her highlights more. Don't go too crazy here, just like that. she's a little too red, so I'm gonna go down with the reds here. Also, let's go down with the greens. And if I like the lighting, which I don't, let's go higher on this until you're satisfied. Look at it from the far, looks good, awesome. Now, one thing is she's a little more saturated than the rest. So one way to fix that is I'm gonna make another node, the hue and saturation node, and then under saturation I'm just gonna drag this down until it matches better. Now it looks a little too green. I'm gonna go back to my greens and bring down my greens. Great. Now that I discovered that her shadow is softer than his shadow, I have to adjust my sun a little. So I'm gonna go under my light settings and bring the angle up of my sun until his lighting matches hers more or less. Can work on the direction a little, but the direction seems to be fine. Just the softness a little. So I'm just gonna make it a little softer. Look at my overall scene if it still looks good. If it does, I'm happy. Now when we believe it's done, I would never delete my character. I just remove him from the viewport and the render, so now he's gone. Now I'm just gonna scrub through it because obviously I can't fully see that in full speed, but just go to a few frames, making sure that everything looks proper. And here her highlights look a little too bright, so I'm gonna go back to her and bring this down a notch. Now once you're happy with that, and I'm still gonna work on it, but I'm still gonna show you real quick how you can render all of that in Blender. So I'm just gonna go to my render properties, and there's a few numbers here which are important. So I always use the denoiser on viewport and in the render, and the lower this number is, the longer it's going to take, but also the better it's going to look. So for like a very good render, this is what I recommend, 0.01 if it has to look good. The max samples don't have to be that high. I'll always render it in like 4 or so, 4,000. Doesn't have to be that high. Usually I don't go over 512 these days, but I'm still experimenting with that. Probably you're going to be okay with a number like 50. Rarely I really see a difference, but that's really up to you. So that's basically the range we are at. If you have a graphics card, make sure to render in optics and what else? Albedo and normal, light tree. If you use haze in your scenes, I would turn off fast GIM approximation. Don't turn this on, turn this off, because this is going to make it look render faster, but it's going to look worse. And make sure to turn motion blur on. And anything else, yeah, I usually render in H, and my exposure is on -9 right now because my sun is so bright. I usually set the sun to like 1,000 because that's physically that's a proper number, so it's a sun of 1,000. And I do use a compositor, so make sure you are plugged in directly into your composite, because you don't want to have all this background we tracked before, when you don't want all those nodes, so you just want the composite, the actual foreground. Oh, we shouldn't have a background. I'm gonna delete that. Yeah, and that's basically it. If you actually want to render, go to file output. Frame rate should be alright, but double check it so that tracking and all that is going to work. The resolution you want, the frame range you want, then select your folder here you want to render in, and you don't necessarily need RGB alpha anymore because you have a whole 3D scene. RGB is good enough. Color depth I usually do 16. Compression I go to 0. It renders faster and it looks better. The files are bigger, so that you know. And I render usually in a PNG sequence. So that's what I do. And once you're done, hit render animation, and that's the final result. So you've seen the result already. I haven't seen it yet because I'm still working on the scene. But essentially what I still do in After Effects, I adjust the colors a little, make sure the shadows look right, the highlights look right, and maybe I add like a lens flare or something like that to make it look a little better. You know, color adjustments. And of course in Premiere I do some sound editing and making it look cool. And also I have this whole selfie, which is basically I used the same scene, I cut her out and brought her into the foreground. I did all of that in Photoshop with just one frame. But that's basically it. I know that was a pretty long video. I hope that was all clear what I was doing. If it wasn't, please let me know in the comments below. I'm always open to answer all of your questions if you have any. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you enjoy that kind of content. Like the video, of course, and see you in the next video. Toodaloo.